Today we'll be dealing with Sino Centrism. We'll divide it into five broad sections. One is the introductory part. The second is the concept of Sino-centrism, what it means. The third is the tribute system, which is closely associated with the Sino-centric system. The fourth is the attitude of various tributary countries or tributary states, such as Japan, Vietnam, Korea, Burma, and Europe, broadly Europe. And then we'll deal with Chinese nationalism. China is one of the largest countries in the world, and its size is about the whole of Europe. Apart from many other things, China can boast of being in possession of the largest written, uninterrupted tradition of historical records, which is not found in any other country of the world, not to speak of our country. And in fact, it is frequently possible to know the year, the month, the date when a particular took place in China. This country is also the home of 56 nationalities. And of these 56 nationalities, the most important nationality is the Han nationality. And more than 96% of the Chinese population belong to the Han nationality. And the other 55 nationalities are all minority nationalities. Now, the concept of Sino-centrism arose out of the necessity of the Chinese ruling classes to politically unify China and to exercise their suzerainty over the neighboring countries of China. That was the need, that was the political necessity that ultimately contributed to the emergence of the concept of Sino-centrism. Sino-centrism is a concept which is also known as the concept of the Central Kingdom, the concept of the Middle Kingdom. And the main perspective is that China stands at the center of the earth, and it was around that center, that is on the periphery, that there are other countries which the Chinese people, or not the Chinese people, but the Chinese state call men from afar or barbarians. And this Middle Kingdom or the Central Kingdom is the center of civilization, and all the knowledge flows from that central point, from that Central Kingdom or the Middle Kingdom. And all the other people who are standing on the periphery, that is people, foreigners, men from afar, they are regarded as barbarians. And it was the emperor of China, that is Huang Ti, who is the only legitimate emperor of the world. Chinese emperor is the only legitimate emperor of the world, and that is the concept of Sino-centrism. Now, as a matter of fact, in China, as we understand, there is widespread ethnic diversity, and she needed an ideology which would help in politically unifying China, in developing a sense of national identity, and it would bring about domestic unity, and it would also justify hard domination over the neighboring states or the neighboring countries of the world. However, such a concept also means that the civilization or the ruling classes, they suffered from an very important limitation. A limitation which has been pointed out by Joseph Needham. Joseph Needham says that precisely is the reason why comparative history as a subject could not develop in China. And later on, the concept of cultural Sino-centrism developed, that is, which emanated from political Sino-centrism. And it points out that that the neighboring countries are mere cultural offshoots of China, and that those other countries standing on the periphery, they did not have any uniqueness of their own. They were denied the uniqueness which every nationality, every state definitely has. The Sino-centric system, as we can find, was a hierarchical model. China standing at the top and everyone else down the ladder at the bottom. And it's a model, hierarchical model of international relations. That is, which is expanded to external relations also. And it prevailed in East Asia until the weakening of the Qin dynasty in China. That was the period, that is Manchu dynasty in China. And when European powers, as also Japan, made inroads, made encroachments into China, mainly in the 19th century, second half of the 19th century. The idea is that it was the Chinese emperor which gained the mandate of heaven. It's a mandate from heaven to rule over the earth, to rule over mankind. It's a celestial empire which is also distinguished by Confucian codes, Confucian ideology, and they regarded themselves as the only civilization in the world. And the emperor of China was the only legitimate emperor of the world. These are part of the Sino-centric system. So China stands at the center, and around China we have different states, all states regarded by the Chinese authorities as barbarians or people coming from afar. And surrounding countries, there are many surrounding countries, as you know, if we look at the geography of China, we can see that we have Japan, we have Korea, we have Vietnam. Now, all these countries were regarded as the vassal states of China by the Chinese authorities. They were vassals. And their relationship, the relationship between the vassals and the central kingdom, was based on the tribute system. It was a tributary relationships. It was the foreign powers, other powers which offered tributes to the emperor. Emperor was Huangti, and Huangti was a son of heaven. He received the mandate of heaven, and he had divine qualities. The title of the emperor only belonged to the Chinese emperor, to the Chinese ruler. And all other rulers in other states were regarded as kings or rulers, but never of the emperor. There was only one emperor in the world, and that was the emperor of China, and all other rulers were subordinate to that Chinese emperor, and they were regarded as king or one, W-A-N, one. There are two essential aspects of Sino-centrism. One was the identification of the heartland, and the other was the legitimacy of dynastic succession. Now, originally, the center was synonymous with North China because it was in North China that was a cradle of Chinese civilization. And ultimately, the empire expanded. It extended from North China to other countries through conquests over many centuries. What is important is that this Sino-centrism, unlike Han chauvinism, Han nationality constituted the dominant nationality, majority nationality, unlike Han chauvinism, did not necessarily have a racial basis in Han Chinese ethnicity. Successive peoples from the north, such as Xianbei, Jurchen, Manchus, they took their place at the center, at this central system with varying degrees of success. It is not that the Huns only were at the center, but there are others also who, over the centuries, they were also tried to find their place in the center with varying degrees of success. As for example, the Xianbei empires during the southern and northern dynasties regarded the Han Chinese regimes of southern China as barbarians. So one part regarding the other part of China as barbarians. It is not that only those who stood at the periphery, but within China, modern China also, if we consider the case of modern China, the geography of modern China, then one part, which was a central part at that time, regarded the other part as the barbarian part, irrespective of whether they constituted the dominant nationality or not. And they were regarded as barbarians because they refused to submit to Xianbei rule. In a similar way, the Manchu dynasty regarded the initial wave of European incursions in the modern period, that is during the 19th century, as barbarians. So Europeans were also regarded as barbarians. Now, so that was the center. And beyond the center were several concentric circles, local ethnic minorities were not regarded as foreign countries. They were within China, not regarded as foreign countries. But they were governed by their own leaders. They had their own leaders, local nationalities, minorities, they had their own leaders, subject to the recognition of the emperor. That is, they would have to submit to the Chinese emperor. They would have to pay their allegiance to the Chinese emperor. And they were regarded as part of it, and they were part of the system, and they were not regarded as barbarians. And outside this circle, we have the tributary states, which offered tribute to the Chinese emperor, and over which the Chinese emperor exercised sovereignty in his own way. Now, it was during the period of the Ming dynasty that the tribute system entered its peak period. And these states were classified at that time into different groups. As for example, the southwestern barbarians included some of the major states of East Asia also, and Southeast Asia, such as Korea, Japan, Ryukyu Kingdom within Japan. This kingdom no longer exists, Ryukyu Kingdom, Annam, Kampuchea, Cambodia at that time, Vietnam, Sham, Champa, Java. These were some of the barbarian states. And there was also a second group of southwestern barbarians, which was made up of countries such as Malacca, Sri Lanka, and some other, many of which became modern independent states in course of time. And in addition to this list, we have northern barbarians, we have northeastern barbarians, two large categories of western barbarians, none of which survive till the modern period as separate or independent states. And this system, this was a complex system, no doubt about it. And this system, which is already a complex one, was complicated further by the fact that some of the tributary states had their own tributaries. They had their own tributaries. As for example, Laos was a tributary of Vietnam at one point of time. And Ryukyu Kingdom paid tribute to both China and Japan. So that was the situation in the earlier period, in the days of Uyghur. Now, beyond the circle of tributary states were countries which were involved in trading relationships with China. The Portuguese, for example, they were allowed to trade with China from the leased territory in Macau, but Portugal did not officially enter the tributary system. So there were variations of different types. The tribute system is an integral part of the Sino-centric system. And the relations between between China standing at the center and those standing on the periphery, that was based on the tribute system. And it was very much influenced by the Chinese own outlook towards the history of the world. The concept of the central kingdom, as we have pointed out, was that China stands at the center of the world and all others standing in the periphery. So when the men from afar would come, they would have to pay tribute to the emperor. And the payment of tribute meant that they were owing allegiance to the Chinese emperor. And the Chinese emperor would, in his turn, out of benevolence, would give gifts to those men coming from afar with tribute. And it was expressed in a ritual form. This whole relationship was between the two parties was expressed in a ritual form, which in Chinese is called a kowtow system.
Sir, can you please explain the concept of this kowtow?
Kowtow essentially is bowing down before the emperor. In our country, in the Bengali society, we have pranam. You call it pranam, shashtangi pranam. That is, the person is standing before the emperor and starts bowing down. There are a series of kneelings. Ultimately, your head is on the floor before the emperor. That is the kowtow system, and which clearly explains who is superior and who is inferior. That was a system which was part of the tributary system, payment of tribute and getting of gifts out of benevolence from the side of the emperor. The cultural and economic centrality of China was recognized throughout Asia. And most countries submitted to the Sino-centric system because they had much to gain out of it, because they received the political recognition to make trade with China. However, the attitude of different countries differed. There were different attitudes from different countries. On one point, we are more or less sure, is that they received, all those countries standing on the periphery, they received many things from the Chinese culture, such as the Chinese written language was one, Confucianism, Buddhism, which went from India. Now, that part they received a lot of it from China. As for example, Japan. The Japanese are described in the China's Book of Han, which was completed in 111 AD, as the people of Wo, W-O-O, who are divided into more than 100 states and who bring tribute at fixed intervals. That is the description of the Japanese in the Chinese Book of Han. That is the title of the book. In the 7th century, there is an interesting story, and that is the Prince Regent of Japan, Shotoku Taishi, 574-622, that was his period. He antagonized the Emperor of China by sending him a letter which started with the words, "The Emperor of the land where the sun rises sends a letter to the Emperor of the land where the sun sets to ask if you are healthy." That is the beginning of the letter. And the Chinese emperor, of course, became very angry after receiving such a letter. Now, soon after that, the Japanese court reformed its administrative apparatus, particularly after the Taika reforms, and a system of land distribution to resemble the Chinese system. And they initiated a process, a prolonged process of taking parts of the Chinese culture into Japan. That was one thing. It was a long period of interaction between China and Japan. There were, in the late 13th century, when the Mongols were in power in China, that was the period of the Yuan dynasty, there were 2 attempted Mongol invasions into Japan. which were thwarted with the help of typhoons, which they called the divine wind, kamikaze. And after that, Japan acquired a stronger national unity. And in the Tokugawa period in Japan, more or less the modern period, they emerged to reconstruct and recover the native roots of Japanese culture and started to exclude later elements which were borrowed from China. Now later on, as a rival of China, they became a rival of China, and there were two important wars, as you all know. One is the War of 1894-95, first Sino-Japanese War. China was defeated in the war, and then we have the long war, 1937-45, when Japan occupied large parts of China after setting up the puppet Manchukuo government in Manchuria. And it was from then on that they started to use the name of Shina, S-H-I-N-A, Shina, for China, which was based on the Western world, China. Vietnam was under Chinese rule for approximately 1,000 years before gaining independence in the 10th century AD. And in the subsequent centuries, Vietnamese drove out Chinese invaders time and again. And conflict with China was a major theme, major part in the political history of Vietnam since then. Vietnam was very much Sinicized. They used classical Chinese architecture, philosophy, religion, and literature. Unlike East Asian states, which communicated in written Chinese, Burma used a different written language. China consistently regarded Burma as China's vassal state, but Burma refused to accept such a status. But the Burmese interpreted Burma as a younger brother and China as the elder brother. That was the relationship. Korea was another country which was greatly influenced because of its geographic and historical proximity to China. Korean states had been protected from the Chinese invasions by militarily powerful states such as Goguryeo, which ruled for a long period of time. And Goguryeo state was a very powerful state in comparison to China. And she also adopted her own centric system in relation to the neighboring countries. Then there were frequent conflicts between the two. And after Goguryeo, we have Goryeo, which became the new powerful state in Japan. That was the period of the Chinese Sung dynasty. Bilateral trade developed between the two countries. Particularly Chinese silk was in great demand. Goryeo's porcelain was in great demand in China. And then there were Mongol invasions when peaceful relationships came to an end, etc. This was the situation. As in the case of other countries, in the case of Europe, we have the application of the tribute system, as you all know, and it centered around Canton. Canton was the only port which was open to the foreign powers in the initial stages before the Opium War and the signing of the Treaty of Nanking. And Western powers, in the Western countries, particularly Britain, there was much demand for Chinese commodities like silk, porcelain, tea, brocades, etc. And as a result of which there was an inflow of bullion into China. And then the Western powers introduced, both Britain and America introduced opium into China. And so there was an outflow of bullion from China, and it resulted in a process which ultimately culminated in the First Opium War, 1840-42, and the signing of the Treaty of Nanking, which incidentally was the first humiliating treaty that China was forced to sign with the Western powers. And that was followed by another Second Opium War, and the signing of the Treaty of Tientsin against Anglo-French forces. And it was these treaties which marked the end of Sino Centrism as a system of international relations in Asia. It is important to note that Sino-centrism is not synonymous with Chinese nationalism. The successive dynasties of China were Sino-centric in the sense that they regarded Chinese civilization to be universal in its reach and application. That was the idea. And Chinese nationalism actually developed particularly during the period of when European powers intervened. Particularly, yes, when the Ming dynasty was in, when the Manchus came to power, Manchu is regarded as foreigners, and anti-Manchu sentiment was regarded as national sentiment. But after that, we have the European, during that period, and after that also, we have the entry and encroachment, more and more inroads of European powers. So Chinese nationalism developed in course of confrontation with the Western powers.
When and how did this Chinese nationalism emerge?
Chinese nationalism emerged, of course, from the time of the Manchu dynasty. Because the Chinese always regard, when the Ming dynasty was overthrown by the Manchus or the Qin dynasty in 1644, the Chinese people always regarded the Manchus as foreigners. And there was definite anti-Manchu sentiment, anti-Manchu pro-Ming sentiment. That was very much there, even during the time of the Taiping Rebellion, or when Sun Yat-sen led his Chinese Revolution of 1911. That anti-Manchu sentiment was very much there. That was one part of it. But after that, we have also anti-European dimension. Not only anti-British, but anti-British, of course. But there were a large number of European powers. They had been contending for supremacy, for extending their spheres of influence in China. And it was particularly during the time of the May 4th movement, when the call was given to exterminate the foreigners. It was clearly anti-imperialist and anti-Confucian also, meaning anti-feudal. So Chinese nationalism in the true sense of the term developed from then on, that is in the 20th century, particularly during the May 4th movement, when it was very much clear. The Sino-centric system is also known as the concept of the Middle Kingdom or the concept of the Central Kingdom. It means that China stands at the center of the earth, and all other countries on the periphery, they are barbarians from afar. They should pay tribute to the emperor, Chinese emperor, and that emperor in turn would also pay gifts to them. And so it was very much a part of the tribute system. It had a long period of existence, and it came to an end, of course, during the period when foreign powers, European powers, intervened in the Chinese mainland.